Meyerholds biomechanics, both praised and damned during the 1920s as a new method of training actors and a new performance style, suppressed during the 1930s and later forgotten. Passed on in only a few fragments, biomechanics inspired theater practitioners such as Grotowski, Brooke, and the Living Theater, but was unable to found a living tradition. Biomechanics became a legend. This film will document the conceptual bases of biomechanical training as well as its specific forms and principles through visual demonstration. Thus, the film may provide a point of departure for a critical discussion of biomechanics geared toward its practical application in the contemporary theater. Vsevolod Meyerhold was born in 1874 in the Russian city of Penza. After abandoning his study of law, he began his training as an actor at the school of Nemirovich, Danchenko, and Stanislavski. An enthusiastic follower of Stanislavski, Meyerhold adopted his system and created brilliant portrayals of Treplev in Chekhov's The Seagull and of Ivan in Alexei Tolstoy's Tsar Fyodor Ivanovich at the Moscow Art Theater. Prompted by Chekhov's criticism of the art theater's acting style, Meyerhold soon began searching for his own non-naturalistic conception of theater. After years in the provinces, a return to the experimental studio of the art theater, and his own experiments as a director at the leading theaters in St. Petersburg, he founded his own studio in 1913. There he experimented with the forms of commedia dell'arte, Japanese kabuki theater, and pantomime. Inspired by the Sicilian actor Grasso, Meyerhold developed the etudes and acting styles that would later become his system of biomechanics. On April 25, 1922, with the legendary production of Krummelinck's The Magnanimous Cuckold, biomechanics made its first public appearance as the training system and performance style that was to found a new theatrical culture. The production evoked lively discussions. People were either outraged or enthused by the rhythmic and physically expressive style of acting, by the actors in their uniform costumes, the so-called prazadeshta. Public demonstrations of the new system soon followed, demonstrations of biomechanics and of its nucleus, the etudes. In composing movement, biomechanics borrows a fundamental concept from music. It creates scores for movement that are analogous to a musical score. The etudes demonstrated the nascent development of such scores that would serve as the basis of an actor's work. Only a few documents have survived from the period when biomechanics originated. Among these are the following film clips of excerpts from biomechanical etudes. The development of both Meyerholds theater and biomechanics was cut short violently by the increasing Stalinization of Soviet society, which resulted in the regimentation of artistic thought and the normative dogma of socialist realism. His theater was closed in 1938. In 1939, Meyerhold himself was arrested, and after a sham trial, executed in 1940. For a long time, biomechanics was strictly taboo. In this historic series of photographs, Nikolai Kustov demonstrates the etude, shooting from the bow. During the 1930s, Kustov was an actor and the instructor for biomechanics at the Meyerholds State Theater. Lee Strasberg brought these photographs back to the United States after a trip to Moscow in 1934. Since then, there have been a number of attempts in Western Europe and the United States to reconstruct biomechanics from photographs and historical materials. But none of these has been able to base itself on an immediate, practical transmission of Meyerhold's system. In the Soviet Union itself, it was only in the 1970s that Nikolai Kustov could pass his understanding and practical knowledge on to a group of young actors at Moscow's Theater of Satire. One of these actors was Gennady Bogdanov.
For me, this way of working was entirely unaccustomed. I didn't realize immediately that this is an extremely interesting system. When I began working at the theater after I had finished theater school, Kustov was already there. And when I attended his class for the first time, it was called plastic training at our theater. I began initially to work in the way that I was used to doing from school.
When did you discover that biomechanics is more than a system for training actors?
I can tell you that exactly now. I've thought about it a lot. When, finally, I really internalized the principles of biomechanics. And I can now say that this happened when I truly came to a deep understanding of the essence of the biomechanical etudes. We spent most of our time learning the etudes, memorizing them. For us, they were new, unfamiliar material. Initially, we didn't know how to deal with them. Some of the actors had trouble coordinating the movements or meeting the physical demands. It was only when we had gained a command of the etudes, of their structure and choreography, that we began gradually to understand the real principles of biomechanics, Atkas, Hasil, Tormos, more deeply. This required great efforts and daily training.
Потому что это требует неимоверных усилий и, в общем, каждодневной тренировки.
Gennady Bogdanov demonstrates the etude, shooting from the bow. The etudes form the nucleus of the actor's training. Working on them, the actor practices the principles of biomechanics until he internalizes these principles as fundamental psychophysical paradigms. The point of departure for Meyerhold's biomechanics was his vision that the inner psychological moment of the acting process could be derived from the outer physiological moment. Work on the etudes is preceded by a series of exercises that develop elements of movement and abilities important to Meyerhold's system, such as the actor's awareness of space, his command of physical objects, and his sensitivity and connection to his partner. These exercises serve to develop a movement capacity governed by the so-called principle of totality. The entire body acts to create each and every movement. In addition, the actor develops his ability to work with his center of gravity, with tension and release, and with the rhythmicality of movement as well. Work on the etudes themselves follows. This work uses the principle of segmenting movement, in which each individual movement is broken up into basic elements, into movement phases which then come together to form an unbroken cycle. This cycle consists of the atkas, the preparatory movement in an opposite direction, the pasil, the execution of the movement, and the stoika, the stance or fixation of the movement. Initially, the actor practices each movement element of an etude separately. Then the elements are joined to form a continuous flow. The internalization of these laws of movement enables stage movement, in contrast to everyday movement, to become more organic and more conscious without freezing in dead poses, and thus movement becomes expression. Let us return to the segments of the individual movements. The origin of any movement in biomechanics is demonstrated particularly clearly in the principle of atkas. The word atkas literally means refusal. In biomechanics, it is used to designate the preparatory movement in an opposite direction which makes the intended movement possible. Another example. Atkas. Atkas. As the result of the atkas, the execution of the intended movement follows as the pasil. Pasil literally means the sending. It designates the execution of the movement. Pasil. Pasil. The completion of each individual movement creates the moment of the stoika. Stoika, literally stance, designates the end point, the coming to a standstill, the fixation of the movement. Atkas, pasil, stoika. Again. Atkas, pasil, stoika. The fixation is relative. The moment of the stoika is always simultaneously the point of departure for the next movement. It is important that the stoika doesn't become a pose, that the movement doesn't die. Rather, a latent dynamism must be maintained. In order to be able to execute each of these phases of the movement in a conscious way, each movement is executed under the aegis of the tormos. Tormos, literally the brake, designates the process of conscious control of the dynamic of the movement, applying the brakes at the appropriate moment to be able to finish the movement in a controlled manner. Another example. Tormos. The movement called the preparation for the run. The tormos is actually at work throughout the movement. It thus allows the actor to execute every movement through the conscious use of shifts of weight, of tension and release, and of the economical structuring of the movement. In the starting position, the body weight is distributed equally through both legs. Atkas, a slight shift of weight onto the right leg as a preparation for the pasil. Pasil, the shift of the weight onto the left leg. During the last phase of the movement, the tormos controls the momentum so that the body can come to stillness securely. Stoika. The upper body is coiled around the command point, the solar plexus. Similarly, the actor's energy is directed towards his center. The body weight rests entirely on the left leg. The right leg is completely free. These stoika positions are not poses, but rather dynamic transitions in the flow of movement. They are called rakurs in biomechanics, a concept borrowed from film. We can see clearly, yet again, how a moment in the etude is built by looking at the movement, the fall to the stone. The starting position is now the stoika, preparation for the run, with the focus directed toward the imaginary stone. The body weight rests on the left leg. The upper body and the energy are coiled around the solar plexus. The atkas is like the compression of a spring which releases into the pasil. The body opens upward, the focus follows the right hand, the weight shifts first to both legs, then to the right leg, and continues to shift to the right until the actor intentionally loses his balance and falls. During the fall, the tormos is engaged. The body lands on the right hand in an elastic manner. In the moment of the stoika, it rests on 3 points, on the right hand, on the outside edge of the right foot, and on the inside edge of the left foot. Once more, atkas, pasil, tormos,